Hello, reporting live from Mothcon is your host of Stare to the Abyss, Richard Gerlach, and next to me, as always, is Matt Brandenburg.
I am just full of nonsense. It's going to be perfect.
And we have a very special guest, Nicole Cushing.
Howdy. Great to be here, folks.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, I was so excited to read this. So this was perfect.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad that you were excited to read it.
Yes. As soon as I saw it, I think up for I can't remember if it was up, announced it on the Patreon or Word Horde or whoever announced it. I was like, oh, I'm pre-ordering this right now. So yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. It's a small press writer, every order counts, and every word of mouth counts, and every interview counts. We don't have the same kind of marketing support that the publishers who are based out of New York have. So I'm very grateful for any opportunity to talk to my work, talk about my work, and very grateful for folks who pre-order the books and are supportive of them.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's true. I think I've read what pre-orders are even better. I mean, like, obviously buying it and word of mouth and all that stuff is good too. So like maybe not a right level, but like I know pre-orders really help because that just gives people that like knowledge that there are buyers out there. So yes.
Yeah, definitely. And especially pre-ordering through like there's a couple different ways that people pre-ordered. One was through Amazon and the other was through Word Horde. But pre-ordering right through Word Horde is great, or just ordering the book through Word Horde is great because that means that more money goes to Word Horde and less money goes to Amazon.
Right.
And so that's always a good thing for a small press publisher too.
Exactly. And they do that really cool thing, which we've talked on the show about. And I know Grimscribe does it too, but where they give you the ebook version as well, which is just perfect because then you have to both.
I mean, it's kind of cool that Ross started doing that a few years back now, and it's just a good thing. See, we are front loading this. We're doing the sales pitch first,
right?
I'm talking about. And I imagine people are out there listening saying, my goodness, this is hard sell. It's like, and by the way, it's like if you go through Word Horde, you get they get more money. But at the same time, I think it's helpful to not be ashamed of the monetary part of being a writer, especially like I said, being a small press writer. We are. The Rocky against Apollo Creed, in the arena. And so, but I'm happy to talk about other things besides how to order Mothwoman from your digital retailer or your bookstore of choice. And talk about the book or whatever you fellas want to talk about. I am at your disposal. I will give you football predictions. I will give you, astrological predictions. I mean, they're not going to be any good necessarily. They'll probably be like completely half-assed. But I'd be happy to, basically share the wealth of my imagination with you all in whatever capacity that the next hour or so.
Oh, I love it.
Well, how are you with crystals? That's the question.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one.
How are you with crystals? That's the question.
How am I with crystals? Well, there was that crystal meth issue a few years ago.
That's a different kind of crystal.
But I'm on probation now, and on the up and up. My house hasn't exploded in the last 6 months. So
that's a plus.
Well, before we dive into Mothwoman, we'd like to
let's see it. Let's see you recover.
Right. Before we dive into Mothwoman, we'd like to give a weekly recommendation of just some like media we have consumed last week, books we're reading.
Yeah.
We'd like to recommend our audience. So I I'll get the big one out of the way for me. I saw Halloween Ends Thursday night.
Oh
And
man, does Evil die? Does Evil die tonight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, they don't say does Evil die tonight in this movie, thankfully.
Well, I mean, Anthony Michael Hall died, so I mean, not
true.
in real life, but in the movie.
So this takes up 4 years after Halloween Kills. And Laurie has moved on and is living with her granddaughter. They got a new house together. And I think the way this movie portrays Laurie is the best portrayal I've seen of her in these new like canon sequels to the original. She's less like Sarah Connor survivalist Laurie Strode and more kind of like, how do you expect a woman like living with the trauma that she did, but being able to move on because Michael hasn't resurfaced in like 4 years. He's been gone. And we get introduced to a new character who was babysitting a child, and an accident happens that causes the child's death. And everyone begins kind of bullying him in the town and being like rude to him about him killing a child and being a new Michael Myers and being the new evil. And he's just this kind of like guy that had an accident happened, and everyone's just like, the bullying to him is like so fucking extreme too. Like it's ridiculous. But he eventually begins dating Laurie's grandmother, and things or Laurie's grandmother.
I was like, holy crap!
Laurie's granddaughter.
Okay.
And,
that'd be a more interesting movie.
All of a sudden, murders begin happening in Haddonfield again, and so in the movie, like all they needed to do is they needed to have Laurie and Michael Myers like have that final confrontation. That's all this movie really needed to be. And with this new character, they just took a big swing to the fences. And it depends on you if it works or not. I can't say if it does work or if it doesn't work because I've heard opinions from all over the board. No one can agree.
Yeah.
To me, I thought it was very entertaining. Did I think it was good? No, I did not think this was a good movie. But I laughed so hard at a few scenes, I was crying. So, this movie was wild, and they didn't need to do what they did, but I'm happy they did what they did because it made it that much more like, what the fuck? Like, half the time I was watching this, I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what? Like, what are you doing? Like, it made no sense, and I loved it. And,
what was Michael doing for 4 years? Did they discuss that?
Do you want the spoilers?
He was going to college.
Yeah, I know. Like, just given odd jobs and walking to town.
I'm going to give some slight spoilers here for our audience. So, like, if our audience doesn't want these spoilers, you can skip ahead like a minute or two to avoid them. Michael Myers was in a fucking sewer with his mask on.
For 4 years?
For 4 years. Like, nobody's been killed for 4 years. Michael Myers is just in a fucking sewer with his mask on.
Doing what?
The bullied. He gets thrown off a bridge. They leave him for dead. Michael Myers drags him into a sewer, and he gazes into Michael's eyes behind the mask, and it passes Michael's evil onto this kid. And there's a part where he returns to the sewer to jump Michael Myers. He fucking jumps Michael Myers and takes his mask and then fucks off.
Oh my god.
Oh.
That no. I no.
And then,
at least they could have gotten the Ninja Turtles involved if they were going to
right.
That would have been like, why not throw them in? Like,
exactly.
The Ninja Turtles meet Michael Myers. Like, it's a whole Universal movies kind of monster mash.
Oh, that would be perfect. Splinter teaching him. Yeah. Michelangelo giving him pizza. It would have been perfect.
Yeah.
When he gazed into Michael's eyes and like they had the whole like thing, and I'm like, I just laughed. I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous. And like, I low-key kind of love that they did this because
Right.
it just makes no sense. They didn't need to do it, but they did it, and we have it, and it exists. And a lot of people hate it, but a lot of people really love it. I think it was just very entertaining, but also very stupid. There is also, I could tell us after, but the way they get rid of Michael was the funniest thing, and I can say that for later if you guys want.
Either way,
So, do you want me to spoil Michael's death? Because we know he's going to die.
Sure.
I'm not going to watch the movie, so you can tell me.
So the new kid,
I assumed he died.
The new kid kills himself to have Laurie take the knife out, so the granddaughter thinks Laurie killed him.
Oh my God.
Then the actual Michael Myers comes, takes his mask back. Laurie and Michael have a face-off. Laurie then attacks Michael. She's about to kill him. He's beginning to overpower her. The granddaughter comes back. She finishes Michael Myers off by caving in part of his head. Then Laurie goes, he's finally dead. The granddaughter goes, he's not dead enough.
Oh, God.
The camera cuts to a fucking candlelight vigil at the dump.
Oh.
Where they have that machine grinder thing, and they crowd surf Michael Myers' lifeless body into the machine grinder, mask and everything, and the machine grinds everything up.
Oh, jeez.
And that's how they dispose of Michael Myers in this movie. I cried at that part.
Probably more efficient than what they did in more efficient than how they disposed of the body in Fargo with the wood chipper, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's very true. And then the movie ends with Laurie writing her memoir and just ends with evil never dies, it just changes shape.
Oh, God. All right,
that's
maybe one
deep,
day I'll watch this.
Yeah. Whoa. That is so deep.
Shower philosophy right there.
Oh, God.
My cat just showed up too, so she might be starting to meow.
Oh, no worries.
And then besides that, the only thing I really have to say is the audience knows I'm the anime nerd among the people here. Chainsaw Man anime finally came out, and it's everything I wanted it to be. So if you're into anime and you want to watch some bonkers horror action stuff, Chainsaw Man's the way to go. It is insane and fun and gory as all hell. Lots of chainsaws and lots of blood.
I would hope so.
I've also been reading, for a bit of a change of pace, I've been in kind of a weird reading slump where I just find myself like bouncing through different books, and like I'm trying to just find something to keep me grounded. And usually when I do that, I find that returning to like crime novels tends to like helps ground me a bit better. So I picked up Iron Lake by William Kent Krueger. And like it's a really solid crime novel. Like it's about this town it's about Aurora, I think Aurora, Colorado. And our main character is a man who's half Irish, half Native American, and his life is a fucking shit show. But the book opens with the murder of a judge that this newspaper delivery boy comes across. The boy ends up missing, and our main character is trying to figure out like what caused the disappearance of the boy, and it ends up putting himself, his family, and the woman he's cheating on his wife with, all their lives are in danger, and he's trying to like get to the bottom of this before everything gets a lot worse than it's already getting. Nice. Really great prose. The plot's not the most original, but if you want a solid crime novel, it's one of the better ones I've read recently. I'll have more to report once I finish it. I'm like halfway through right now, and it's giving me kind of not as dark as Laird Barron's crime novels, because those got pretty fucking dark. Yeah. But it's giving me like some nice like Laird Barron type parts of visceral violence that I'm kind of digging, and the character work's really good.
Well, that's good.
But that's kind of it for me. I do have my thing about Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival, but I could say that spiel for a little bit. But Matt, what about you?
Yes. All right. Well, I checked out the Crystal Lake Publishing's A Dark Tide series. So this is book 1, and they take 3 authors and they have them tell stories. So this was Wounds to Wishes, and it's Chad Lutzke, John Boden, and Robert Ford, and it's really good. As long as you're fine with some depressing work, Chad Lutzke's full on hitting you with his I can't remember what he calls himself, his depressing horror. He's got some name for it, but he hits you full in that with, we have a junkie couple who are recovering, and it opens up with the girlfriend of our main character had committed suicide. And so he does not want to face that. So what he does is he goes through their bucket list that they made one night when they were extremely high. And so he's going through and doing all of these things. And eventually it kind of gets into him getting some, we'll say some like voodoo magic action happens at one point in a bum camp, and he or homeless camp, I should say, sorry. But he so it's really depressing and sad. The next one, Robert Ford's story, deals with a mother whose daughter was murdered, and she also gets some sort of voodoo magic where she can see her for 14 minutes a day for 5 days in this old ancient TV. And so she's got to figure out she doesn't have to, but she ends up trying to figure out who murdered her so she can, strike revenge in that. And that was good. It's a bit much. It's the longest one in this collection, or anthology kind of. I don't know what you would call it. 3 authors in there, but she spends a lot of time dealing with grief, which is fine, but again, there's a lot of it in there, so like be ready for that. And the mystery itself, while was entertaining, you could kind of figure it out fairly quickly, but it was still interesting to get to. And what was interesting was that Chad's story and Robert's story sort of tied together tangentially. They had the same character kind of appears, and which I thought was neat. And what maybe threw me off a little was the third story, John Boden's story, had nothing to do with those two. So it was kind of weird to have these two out of the 3 stories have an interconnection, and the third one didn't. Though maybe it did. And I just didn't pick it up. But John is going straight Arthur Munchen's The White People and the ceremonies that we had read a while back. So it's a farm. There's a lot of weird stuff happening on this farm with like sacrifices and these weird creatures out in the woods. And it's just kind of this piece on kind of where you're at in life. Our main character worked for a very long time in like a retirement community, and he was kind of done with that. But then by the time the story ends, he decides to come back. But it was neat. It was a good concept. I like that they were all kind of dealing with something a little bit more human and depressing. So that was cool to see. And it was just like, it's a fun collection. I think there's another one out or going to be out, so it might be worth checking out. Moons to Wishes is this one. And then to get a little wackier, maybe not wackier, but Halloween time. So I ended up watching the 1930-something Dracula, and it's been a long time. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen it, and watching it this way, it's still really good. It's still very dreamlike and just weird scenes that kind of happen. I think I picked up this time, especially after talking with Gwendolyn Keiss last week, is this story feels more like Renfield's story than Dracula's story. I couldn't give you a time, but it feels like Renfield's in this on camera more than any other character. And I could be just reading it differently, but it just, as you're watching it, it's like everything kind of follows Renfield, and Dracula's there obviously doing his Dracula thing, but like his story again in this movie didn't really it didn't go anywhere. With Renfield, you definitely have this like interesting look at this man that gets turned into this thing that's eating bugs, and just was like trying to help Van Helsing and Dr. Barker and all the help help them, but at the same time kind of be like, no, Dracula, you're my master and I'm still your slave and all this stuff. And so this view made me think of Renfield more than any other character, but it's still a blast to watch. The Blu-ray I have, you could put on Philip Glass's his score that he did back in probably 99, I think. So it was really cool to watch it with his score because I had never done that. I have his score, I picked it up and I listened to that, but to tie it to the movie, it was fun to kind of see the two. But yeah, it was fun. It was a good Halloween time and it was fun to watch Dracula again. So that was my week.
Perfect. So what about you, Nicole?
Well, I was reading, and yesterday I finished a nonfiction book called Charles Fort, The Man Who Invented the Supernatural. And it's a biography of the OG paranormal investigator, Charles Fort. Very interesting man who grew up in a family that in some ways was privileged because they had money, but in other ways was awful because his dad would punish him by depriving food from him. Yeah, and so very emotionally abusive and physically abusive, and so he left. He was cut off by his dad. He spent some time homeless, and eventually became a newspaper reporter. And then what really stuck out to me was how this guy, who at least I more or less thought of him as a bit of a fringe character, was rubbing elbows with established literary personalities of the time. He was, roughly speaking, a contemporary of Lovecraft. So, he was rubbing elbows with novelists like Theodore Dreiser. Like Theodore Dreiser and him were like best friends. And so you really don't think about this, that he was, in a sense, more mainstream than what we would think, at least in terms of who he was hanging out with and who was publishing him and those kinds of things. And his point of view is interesting. It was more, I see him after reading the book as more of a gadfly who was challenging the assumptions of science, because there are all these nagging cases that he discovered from reading, scientific papers where anomalies were mentioned, 19th century scientific papers, of course, but and encyclopedias or just literature from all across the nonfiction spectrum, and finding these odd reports of things like blood raining down from the sky, or frogs, raining down from the sky, or mysterious airships in the sky, where this was before airships even existed, and calling science to question because they refused to look at these kinds of things. So, but at the same time, he wasn't really all that confident in his own theories. So he was kind of being playful with it in a way that was half kind of tongue-in-cheek and half dead serious. And the question is always like, okay, how serious is he being here? And it, so found out a lot of things about him. And of course, we get the adjective Fortean from Charles Fort. If you've ever heard about Fortean, there's a magazine, I think, called Fortean Times. And, basically referring to any kind of investigation of things odd, peculiar, cryptids, UFOs, seances, odd events like rains of frogs. All those things fall under the Fortean umbrella. Ghosts, etc. And so that was very educational. And so the author is Jim Steinmeyer. It's an older biography, at least I think it was came out maybe in 2008 or something like that. So it's not fresh off the presses, but I ran into it in a secondhand store and I just had to get it. So that's what I've been reading. As far as viewing, I revisited the original Wes Craven version of The Hills Have Eyes earlier this week. And it's interesting because you know, as I get older, I get a little bit more timid with that kind of movie. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I can dish it out as an author, but I can't really take it. And so it's interesting how, you know, in that movie you have this family that, I mean, in some ways it's just extremely formulaic. You know, it's like a family that goes out into a rural area and they're not from that rural area, and there's a car accident, and they end up stranded. And in this case, a family of cannibals decides that, you know, their dinner, and goes and you know, decides to attack the family with their I think it's like a truck and a trailer attached to, or a camper attached to it.
Yeah.
And what struck me was just the vulnerability of that family. And there are, you know, there's like, you know, young children. I think there's a baby actually involved there, and, you know, young mothers, and, you know, young fathers, and then there's like the grandfather. And so you have this intergenerational group with different strengths and different vulnerabilities, being challenged by another intergenerational group that is much more primal. And in classic early Wes Craven fashion, the more quote unquote civilized family has to adapt to their new environment and become just as brutal as the people who are menacing them if they're to survive. So yeah, definitely a film about people in the wrong place, you know, wrong time, you know, and not where they belong at all. And the, you know, kind of like the problem with treading where beyond where one should. It almost goes back to those, you know, fairy tales about not going into the woods, except here the woods is the desert. So yeah, that's the other offering that I had. And then I also indulged in some universal horror not that long ago. I think about a week ago, I watched House of Dracula, which is the last movie in the Dracula series, I guess you can say, other than, well, there's the parody, of course, Abbott and Costello Meet Dracula, the last Dracula movie that's kind of played straight. And it's a train wreck. It's really the poorest example of universal horror. I don't really like John Carradine as Dracula. He's, you know, his Dracula is always kind of a wimp. You know, he's always like at the mercy of people and asking people to protect him. And he, you know, in House of Frankenstein, he kind of goes out like a chump, you know, early on in the movie. Yeah, so, but it has this wackiness to it that, you know, is entertaining. I mean, it's only like an hour long. So it has, you know, brevity is the soul of maybe not wit in this case, but entertainment.
Oh my gosh, that's so true.
It's been a long time since I've seen that movie. But
yeah,
I'm soon.
Yeah.
I do love a lot of the Universal monster movies. Like, I watched all those growing up as a kid, like, so many times.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the first horror movie I ever saw was Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, and the only reason I was allowed to watch that is it was Abbott and Costello. And my parents were very uptight and were determined that I should not be allowed to watch horror movies. But there was one, I think maybe on a Sunday morning, and that was my first opportunity. And as a kid, you know, watching that movie, you really identify with Lou Costello there when he's terrified and he sees Frankenstein and he sees Dracula and he's trying to tell Abbott that what he saw, and Abbott doesn't believe him. And it's just like when you're a kid and you see the, you know, or you think you see the monster in your closet or the monster under your bed, and you're trying to tell people that this monster's there and your parents don't believe you. I mean, Lou Costello is kind of the kid in that scenario. And I think watching that as a kid, you are sucked into his point of view, and that's part of the fun of the movie.
Right. Yeah. I think those were some of the first ones I saw for like the Universal horror was the Abbott and Costello ones. And it's such a funny, like, you know, we talk about gateway horror, especially for kids and stuff like that now, and it is funny to think of that because of the humor. People are like, "Well, it'll be fine. You can just watch that." But like, those are legit movies in there, you know, like they're not like the full parodies that we have of Mel Brooks and everything like that, but they're still like, I mean, even Young Frankenstein I think is good. I really like that movie, but it is funny like thinking of that old kind of thing of Abbott and Costello in there and just being like, oh, it's cool, go ahead.
Right. Well, I'm glad that they were in there because otherwise my mom wouldn't have let me watch it. And so yeah, I mean, it's just good fun, and there are good performances in those movies. Like Dwight Fry as Renfield is a wonderful performance, and Bela Lugosi, I think his best performance is actually as Igor. He plays Igor in I think he first appears in that role in Son of Frankenstein, I think. And he reprises it, I want to say maybe in House of Frankenstein. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, there's something basically like very street smart and, shady about his rendition of Igor, and which is delightfully charming. And really works. I think it's better than his portrayal of Dracula. And I think a lot of people feel that way, but yeah, I could talk about Universal monsters all day because, I have a sweet spot in my heart for them, especially Frankenstein. I think those are my favorite films. I mean, you can't go wrong with James Whale is the director. And I just really adore those films.
Yes. They are amazing.
Well, I will say I did a search for Renfields because I don't know why, what sparked it, but there's a movie coming out called Renfield next year. I don't know if you guys have heard about this.
No.
Because I just now.
I have not.
So it's based on a story pitched by Robert Kirkman. It's a horror comedy, and it is starring Nicholas Hoult as Renfield and Nicolas Cage as Dracula.
Oh God. All right.
And the premise is Count Dracula's lackey Renfield finds a new lease on life in modern-day New Orleans when he falls in love with Rebecca Quincy, a feisty but perennially aggressive traffic cop, who's played by Awkwafina.
Oh God.
This movie is going to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a film.
Yeah.
Honestly,
that's a movie.
That's a movie.
It'll be 120 minutes long, you know.
Oh wow.
I don't know. It could be 2.5 hours long, like that Terrifier 2 that's coming out.
Oh,
I don't know how.
I don't think you can stand 2.5 hours of Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's a lot of Cage.
That's a lot of Cage.
It's a lot of Cage,
right?
But I think we should go take this sex and head over to Mothcon.
Mothcon.
Yeah, Mothcon. Yeah. Very small, intimate convention.
Very small and intimate.
Intimate. That's a nice QAnon people going on there. Nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, an eclectic, and that, and some people were there who were who fancied themselves to be directors and were name dropping all the time, and you got that character, and you got the guy who's really upset that no one's attending the opening ceremonies.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Yeah. So
the pear-shaped man.
Yes. So yeah. For those listeners, there is not actually a real convention called Mothcon. Don't go looking for it. Maybe if I had been savvier, I would have created a fictional, web page for this fictional convention as a promotional thing. But if you go looking for Mothcon, you're not going to find any website or anything for Mothcon. There's not an actual convention entry called Mothcon. It's a fictional thing in my novel Mothwoman. But yeah, this is our segue, I think, into talking about the book.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I will say, before diving into the book, as soon as I heard that you were writing like a book inspired, I mean, I should read. There's a lot of similar with Mothwoman, but as soon as I heard the book title and the premise, and I saw it was you that was writing it, I'm like, I need this book now. Like this is something I need to read. And it's honestly like I loved it. It's a fantastic.
Well, thank
book.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it was a blast, and it's I like how much you put in there. This is like such like a, let me get my thoughts straight. So a while back, Rich and I and Mike at the time, we had discussed kind of like the future of horror and where things were going, especially in the middle of COVID, and like what are we going to see, and like what things can we kind of expect. And there's the thing that some people would probably instantly go to, and maybe has already, and I just haven't seen it, is this kind of disease, this virus thing happening and people turning into something or whatever like that. And so anyway, long story short for all of that is what you'd put in here, we did not expect. And I absolutely love the way you capture that like time/now. Because it was just like, I mean, the comments on like wearing the mask and the certain people in this book who don't wear a mask, and then just what's happening around like at that time, because this is set in 2020 for our listeners, so we're dealing with some very interesting political stuff, and you like hit it like hit it just the right spot for all of it to be like, holy crap, no one's gonna do this.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. For me, I mean, everyone had a different experience of the worst part of the pandemic, I think. And so there was part of it that was very collective, but then part of it that was very individual to where you were living and what the laws were and what the cases were, how high the case rate was and all that kind of thing. And so I live in, a red state, and I work in a red state. And so, before a vaccine was available, I did get COVID. I got COVID in November of 2020, like November 14th, actually. So it was after Election Day. I got in about the middle of November of that year. And so there was a worry about that. And then at the bookstore where I work, I was, charged with making sure people were wearing masks. And so you can imagine that I had many interesting conversations and was exposed to many different conspiracy theories and was called many different names by those who opposed at that time. There was a time when it was a legal requirement, and then there was a time when it was our store's requirement. So that was definitely a part of it. And of course, another aspect of it for me was a road trip I took back home to visit my family in May of 2020. So right after the initial lockdown was being lifted in much of the country, at least where I was living, the lockdown was being lifted. And I had to attend to a family emergency, which required me to travel back to my hometown in Maryland. And so traveling during the pandemic is a part of what I was capturing in the novel. And also on the way back from that trip, it was a very, as you can imagine, family emergencies are always just kind of draining. Traveling during the pandemic was draining because of that time. I was there's no vaccine, so I'm wearing a mask constantly. I was like debating whether I should wear a mask when I went to bed at night because, it's like, where are the germs and everything? Just a lot of unknowns. And so, that was another part of it. So I on the way back, I like just on a lark decided I was going to stop off in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, because it was kind of sort of along the way. It was very spontaneous sort of decision I made like the night before I left Maryland. And I just happened to stop in there, and the store or the Mothman Museum that they have in Point Pleasant just happened to have lifted its lockdown a few days before I arrived. I just happened to be one of the few people there that day, so I had pretty much the run of the place. And it quickly drew me in a way that I didn't expect, because there are these different aspects of the Mothman story. You have the kitschy roadside attraction aspect of it, but then you also have this David Lynch aspect to it. You know, this very what people in the world of paranormal investigation call high strangeness, which, you know, is a very David Lynch kind of feel. You know, that very David Lynch kind of experience. And then you have the fact that it's an Ohio River story, and of course I live along the shores for all intents and purposes of the Ohio River. I cross the Ohio River twice a day when my daily commute, and it's also a working class story. If you read the Mothman prophecies, I mean, that's a working class town, and you know, the people involved in those sightings are working class people. And I related to that too. So if I was ever going to write about, you know, some piece of folklore or some social phenomena, Mothman is one that's kind of tailor designed for my imagination. It custom fit. So it worked out very well. And of course, the road trip and everything just kind of got, you know, wrapped up together with it. And I got some creative momentum behind it. And before you knew it, I had given birth to a novel.
I love it.
Yeah. I will say, regards to like the blue collar aspect of this book as well, I feel that's something that goes through a lot of your books. You're definitely one of the better like authors I've come across writing blue collar themed horror stories. It's not.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, it's. I mean, I'm sorry. Let me allow you to finish your question.
I was just gonna say it's just something I see done very well, and coming from someone who's from a blue collar family, I could definitely see like resonate with a lot of this.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a blue collar family, and I live in a blue collar suburb now, a little blue collar working class suburb. And I work basically in a blue collar field now. Retail bookselling is essentially a blue collar job. I'm married to a blue collar guy. And so, yeah, I mean, it's my life, and it's been my family's life. And I never really consciously thought of it in terms of like representation or something, but I just think about it in terms of like, this is not that there's anything wrong with thinking about it in those terms, because I think people do need to have stories about people who they can relate to. And so I'm not poo-pooing that at all, but I just, for me, it was like, I think years ago I had this, you know, choice before me of, well, I think I ought to maybe write about this area of Southern Indiana that I know. And part of me hesitated because it's like, well, is that going to connect with people? But I decided in the end to do it because, you know, there's not a whole lot of other writers writing about this region, and particularly not writing about it the way that I write about it. And so this is my experience. This is kind of like the meat that has fallen down from the sky before me. This is the manna that has fallen in from heaven, that's fallen into my hand. And so, you know, it's like it's what the universe has given me. So why not use it? And I also like that the idea that there doesn't have to be a conflict between being blue collar and having an interest in literature. I know many people. I mean, you know, my father-in-law, who unfortunately I never got to meet. He passed away before my husband and I got married, but was an avid reader and an avid reader of literature, and he was a blue collar guy. And there's lots of stories about these folks who are more or less autodidacts, who just take an interest in books and can talk about them at a very deep level, but don't have a formal education. And I think I don't even know why I said that, but I think it's important to raise the point because it defies the stereotype. So and it's interesting because when I'm, I like modernism and I like weird stuff, but when I'm reading a weird book by, an author like, say, for example, Virginia Woolf, and the first line of Mrs. Dalloway, she, is talking about how Mrs. Dalloway decides to buy the flowers herself, and what a plunge, what a lark. And it's like, it's a plunge and a lark that you did your own goddamn shopping,
Right.
So there's like a limit to how much I can really connect with Mrs. Dalloway because, and I probably should be able to overcome that, but it's like really, and in the same way, like there's another, a short story collection by an author named Leonora Carrington, who is another woman who has this reputation for being kind of odd and bizarre. And of course, I'm drawn to that. But like for the first story in the collection is about this like debutante who doesn't want to go to her coming out ball, so she hires a hyena from the zoo to tend in her place. And so, the hyena has to look presentable. So it rips the face off of the maid and puts it on so that she can appear more human, which is all very absurd and everything. But it's like, I don't care about some debutante's coming out party. It's like, I really don't. And so again, there's that limit to how much I can identify with the stranger stuff that's written from people who don't have that blue collar background. So, I'm happy to serve as a, as a representative, for lack of a better word, of blue collar people. And, it's a proud heritage. I mean, my dad grew up on a farm and then went into kind of blue collar industrial work, but the work ethic that he passed down to me it's a big part of why I think I've had the success that I've had. Just the never giving up and the tenacity and you might have better connections than me, but you're not going to outwork me. And there's something to be said for that. So yeah, I'm proud of it.
Yeah, no. Well, and what I like too with that, it just like thinking of kind of when we talk about like weird horror, the kind of weird horror authors and stuff that they write, when you kind of look at those stories, and not to pick because I'm a huge Ligotti fan, but like a lot of his stories, you're kind of dealing with people who, a little bit of the same. I mean, obviously there's some stories where you're like, okay, this guy's working at a medicine shop, so I get this because he's just sort of doing a job because he needs to do a job. But then like,
right.
But or if we look at like Lovecraft, you're kind of dealing with like these higher little different jobs that are, like you're saying, maybe, or a life that I'm not gonna have or be a part of or was a part of. So yeah, that's what I appreciate with this, and kind of like what Rich was saying, as this kind of capture this and yeah, like I'm trying to think of just like I think it's important to kind of look at that the group of people like that, because there's a lot of us out there, and so it's like they need their stories told.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I agree.
So to get more into Mothwoman, and this hopefully this makes sense. As I was reading through this, you a couple years back had talked about this weird German book, The Adventures of Simplicissimus.
Oh yeah.
And I read that after you had suggested it. and I'm not. This reminded me a lot of that Crazy Adventures and just like falling into situations that this character, we could call her Nancy or Nid, like did not want to be a part of or shouldn't have belonged into. And so I just have to say, like, as I was reading this, I kept thinking back to that and just like, oh, I love that she did this like really absurd like wackiness of like your tires are like the tires on the wheelchair are flat, and so it's like this really crazy like pushing, or like meets this weird director that can name drop like crazy, or this guy. I had to crack up when you talked about the best, I think you called him the best living actor in the Mothman prophecy. I would like put that note and I put a bunch of exclamation points. I was like, Richard Gere's the best living actor.
Well, from the point of view of the aliens,
yeah.
There's. Well, from my protagonist's point of view, she's completely, flummoxed, and she's been wondering whether, like, is he talking about George C. Scott? Isn't he dead?
Yes. Yeah. So, or like, through the beginning, we get this reference to this pepper spray, and she's carrying it around with her, and she's she talks about there's not like a gun range, a shooting range for your pepper spray, but like in an amazing turn of events that just like warmed me and made me laugh was we find out it's a fart spray.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry everybody, fart sprays are
spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Yeah, but
I laughed so hard when that happened though.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I'm not above using a fart joke. It's like Dante in the Inferno uses not one, but two fart jokes, the best of my recollection. And so if Dante can do two, surely I, in all my humility, am allowed one. And what I love about, a lot of my inspiration, a lot of my influence comes from the European literature. And if you read European literature, they don't have the prudishness about the scatological stuff that we have over here, even to this day. And so, Dante drops fart references. The demons fart. That's one of the, and I think that's how they like trumpet the arrival of someone or something. I can't remember, but there's like the demons in hell fart. And kind of like a trumpet or something like that, and then there's another part of where they're talking about the punishment of something, and the reference is like the guy is punished, and it mentions the location of the punishment is like the place out of which he farts, like he was split in two from the top of his head to the place where he farts, and so I mean, and then if you get into that book, and the title, I have it on my shelf here someplace, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Actually, let me go and see, because now I want to know. So now I have to try to remember it. And gosh darn it, it has a couple of different titles. The one that I originally read was just called The Adventures of a Simpleton. Yes. But it's also referred to as like The Adventures of Simplicimus or something like that. Yes. The author's name is Johann Grimmelhausen. And I mean, it's like this tradition of the picaresque, which, these novels mostly about like lower or working class or lower class, people struggling to make ends meet and that kind of thing. And the adventures they have and the roguery involved, and these occasional slapstick, occasionally cruel slapstick, and so, and this interesting connection sometimes with, like humor, but the horrific also being there. And so, this, they were able to kind of do all of this kind of thing in one book. And so I wasn't like consciously thinking of Grimmelhausen when I was writing the book, but I think what I think about, like, okay, what can I bring to the table as a novelist? And with a novel, you need to have a certain kind of narrative propulsion, where, things have to change. And when I think about my style and my approach to things, and this kind of collision of horror and trauma and humor and kind of mental illness, and political twistedness, this kind of vertigo-inducing, vertiginous sort of quality. I think that kind of plot works well for what I can bring to the table. So I think I'm probably going to do more work kind of in that vein, because I think it's a way of keeping things entertaining, certainly, and keeping things running, and at the same time, tapping and offering the reader a lot of the things that they're going to enjoy, and being very economical, doing it quickly, but also doing it so that it can really work through the course of an entire novel. It can sustain a novel, rather than just a novella or a short story, which they don't need quite as much plot to make them work.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, because when I was kind of thinking of that book and thinking of this, I think I love the way, because it moves throughout, like even when we're getting, and it's funny because I was flipping through it right before we called, this, like, because our main character, like I said, is Nancy, or has another name. She tells these little stories, and they're really entertaining, but then, like, there's some stuff that starts to, like, come back in, or either plays later in, like even like the simple story, and I won't spoil it, but with the fan, and what that actually turns out to be. Like, at the time, you're like, it's just this kind of funny thing, because she's doesn't want to, that's what she wants to do, is just kind of lay in bed and look at this fan, and that's like a comforting area. But then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Or even, like, there was a couple other things, and I'm totally drawing a blank, but like when I went back to the beginning after I finished it, I was like, oh, okay, this is working. So, like, it all kind of is in there and makes sense and works, because the one thing that I was, as I was going through it, thinking of, like, it's sort of, and I'm not going to say it this way, but we'll, just for easy to describe it, sort of stream of conscious at parts, because she's kind of going through, but like done in a way, because having read quite a few and to varying degrees, this is, I liked how it works here, like, because it does move us along. Even these silly little stories work and take us to where we need to go. So, and like you said, there's parts where they crack you up, and there's parts where, like, it's horrifying, because kind of what's happening behind, like, the camera, or like around her, where we're focused on this thing, but at the same time you're like, well, crap, she's strapped to a table, or she can't get up, or she's like, even just with, like, we'll say the hotel clerk when she's first shows up at the hotel, and this funny little story about him being a lawyer and all this stuff. But you're like, oh crap, she's like stranded at this random place. Her car's like broken down. She just did something. I don't think this will spoil this part, because it's kind of early, but she sort of time travels, and you're like, all this stuff just happened. But it's a funny little story that she tells about this hotel clerk.
Yeah, she tells her, I mean, and part of it is, I mean, I've always been fascinated by people I see at hotels or at parking lots or any of that kind of thing. And I'm always like thinking, like, okay, what's their backstory, and what are they motivated by? What have they lost in their life? I mean, maybe that's a function of being a writer, or maybe that's a function of overthinking. I don't know. But yeah, I've always been in love with a little bit of digression. And, it's like Caitlin Kiernan uses that to good effect in The Red Tree. She has her protagonist at one point say, I digress. And then she says, I always digress. Digression is my superpower. It's entertaining. And at the same time, I think it works well. And, she's another author who I think is perfectly willing to buck expectations of their work. Actually, I need to make sure. My understanding is that Caitlin uses they them now, so apologies for that, and I'll use they them from here on out. But they use this digression, and they're completely at home with using it, and they make no excuses for using it. And I think part of what in the Red Tree, what they get at is that idea of that digressions are sometimes every bit as real as the main action, quote unquote, and that digressions are almost a flavor of consciousness that are almost like an altered state of consciousness, and that is every bit as valid as our normal waking state of consciousness. So, and again, Kiernan in the Red Tree talks about how, basically there isn't a distinction between dreams and waking states, that, it's all a dream to various it's all a dream to various levels of lucidity, I think is what they say there. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting technique that I like to use, and I think it's also honest. I mean, in goodness knows in this podcast we've digressed
right
multiple times, and so it's just part of how the brain works and how life is, and so why not use it in a novel?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, because everyone does that. It's like you're always like sitting there and you're kind of thinking, and then next thing you know, you're somewhere else, and you're like, wait, because just your brain goes on autopilot, or your body, I should say, and you just end up doing stuff. And but yeah, I really liked it in this. It worked a ton here.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to think how far we want to go in, because this did just come out. So I don't know if we want to. I know I spoiled the farts.
You're okay.
If you want to do a spoiler section, we can just tell our audience, like, next part heavy spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, read the book.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, and we won't go super deep because, again, I think people need to experience it. But it's been about an hour, so I think we're safe. So I think for those that don't make it through to spoiler time, definitely pick this up. It deals with a lot of stuff, not just about the Mothman, but just about a lot of things that happened during COVID time, and just a lot more. Yes. And I think it's amazing. So you should just go buy it. Like we said at the beginning of the podcast, there's lots of places you can go find it.
And it is, and I'll echo what Matt said, everything the book tackles, all the subjects it tackles, which it is a lot. It's juggling a lot of themes. It's tackling a lot of topics. I think it handles them all very, very well.
Thank you.
And like, just to experience the way that Nicole was able to balance all these topics is just really alone to see. Because if I were to explain everything this book covers, you'd like, how the fuck does this cover that?
And the answer is very well.
Yeah. So I think we're safe. So I did not like up to when we get to the hotel, which I keep drawing. I want to look it up. The hotel is called. It's got a really cool
the
name.
Zodiac.
Zodiac, yes. So when we get up into the Zodiac, you're kind of with we're on one mission, which is to help with our main character's father. And so you're on this road trip story, and you run into these like again, talking about these seeds planted of like, we find these stars, spray paint it, and we get cold. And I love that little like time travel jaunt just to fix a wheel. I thought that was such a funny way to use time travel. Be like, well, we just need to fix this wheel real quick, and then we're gonna go right back.
Right.
But then once we get into the Zodiac, I thought it was like perfect, where the tone somewhat switches into like, now we're dealing with crazy like masculinity and this like, we're dealing with like these you kind of call them these nerdy men who are very men. We'll put wolf howl people, and I loved where it went, and then especially with Zinn talking and basically being on Joe Rogan and everything like that.
Right.
That was, I was like, holy crap! But
yeah. Well, I mean, it's that's another part where the pandemic, kind of shaped the experience. I never set out to write anything that was, consciously feminist, but during the pandemic, I have a group of women who, women's support group that I would attend weekly. And during the pandemic, we were on Zoom, and we got Zoom bombed by teenage boys who would say dreadful things, or young men. I guess I don't know whether they were boys or men. All I knew is that they had no dates on Valentine's Day, because it was on Valentine's Day that we were meeting. I remember one of those. And so it was, so I remember that, but and it was really kind of was shaking, because it's like very intrusive, and of course very people who were uninvited and felt free to say terrible things, and jarring, and at that point, and not just myself, but other women in the group, feeling really, kind of violated by that. And so, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I feel like I need to write about this somehow, because again, it was part of my experience. And so that was something that kind of very chauvinist and proud of it kind of attitude, which, like all prejudices, they seem to be like, flying their flag more openly now than they have in past decades. And so you see this reassertion of guys trying to be, so-called alpha males. And it's like any person who postured themselves as an alpha that I've ever met in the past, male or female, has been an overcompensating hot mess. Number one. And it's like, alpha male who is like, not in control of their own finances. It's like, it's like, you're really, you're really able to control things. The credit card company is calling you. But he's like dominant, super stud or whatever. It's like, dominate your finances and then come talk to me.
That was a Peterson book, and actually live your life.
And so it's this, and it just bleeds into the craziness of it all. The craziness of this moment that we're in right now, where I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up in an era that certainly had its injustices and had its fucked up political stuff going on. I mean, I can remember having nightmares about nuclear Armageddon, which, I might have to dust off those nightmares and have them again now, with everything going on with Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the nuclear saber rattling going on with Putin. But at least there was a sense that things were kind of improving, and there was a sense of stability, and that the institution of America's constitutional republic was not being challenged in an overt way. You didn't have people. Well, we did not have Congress, the U.S. Capitol building being stormed by people who were trying to overturn the election. One of which decided to dress as a shaman. It's like, and it just seems like I've had this sense since 2016 that reality has been melting. And that's the thing. I mean, if you look at my work before 2016, it's certainly weird, but the weirdness is more almost internalized. And it's more deeply psychological and not at all sociological. And even now, I still, I think, probably lean more towards being interested in the psychological rather than the sociological. But the fucked up nature of the world these days has kind of stirred me out of my my cocoon, and it's a really disturbing, nightmarish scenario. And I mean, as I'm speaking, this is October of 2020. There will be a midterm election in a month, and we don't know what horrors await the other side of that. If the Republicans win seats and take over, the House of Representatives or the Senate, and so it's a really scary time. And then of course we have the orange Al Capone down in Florida, who is just deranged and and sociopathic. And about 50% of the country really likes him. And so, and that's the thing. Like, I don't understand how anyone can find that man, charismatic. But I think we live in an era where rudeness is kind of mistaken for charisma by certain people. People think that's boldness somehow. And we live in an era where people don't really get nuance. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to say in the novel, like, existence equals nuance. And it's important to recognize that and to be able to engage with things with a nuanced understanding, while at the same time being able to reject some things out of hand, like Mr. Trump. So that doesn't mean that you look for nuance in Donald Trump, because there is no nuance. I mean, it's just the id of a 5-year-old rich boy who insists that if he lost the game of checkers, then someone must have cheated, so he wants to flip over the table. And so I didn't mean to go on a political rant right there, but
okay.
I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. But and so it's just but that shook me pretty deeply. And as a result, especially living in a red state, and I felt a need to engage with that and to vocalize how I felt about it, because these were day-to-day things with me. I mean, I was at the bookstore where I was trying to enforce the mask policy. I went to work every day knowing that there was going to be some confrontation with some customer, and I'm not knowing how that was going to work out. The state where I work in has open carry laws. So in one case, I was having this conversation with a gentleman who was armed. I didn't know how that conversation was going to go. I was called a Nazi at one point. It was all very interesting and rattling. And I always write from the inside out, kind of, about what my experience is. And that's where my stories come from, or a lot of times my personal experiences. And I'm a very emotional writer, so when something like that rattles me, it's gonna come into my fiction.
Well, and in here too, again, like, to kind of go back to some of talking about some of the sillier things in here, but then you get to this part and the idea that she's kind of stuck listening to these men, And like there was so much like happening for me when I was reading it, because it's like the horror of that, like she can't leave, or if she leaves, it's gonna be this bigger ordeal.
Right.
And these
Right.
people, and then like the other thing, and again, this is like maybe me not knowing, and obviously Mothcon is not real, but like when you kind of like think about this kind of what this group would, a group of people going to a convention about the Mothman, um like these frat boy type of people, even though you know they're more like nerdy, but they're still kind of that frat boy concept of
Right.
cheering on this guy, and like all the things they're kind of saying is what you picture. So like, but like in my head, I would assume like a Mothman convention wouldn't have some of these people here, because especially when you get a little bit later, it feels like this group is sort of there. I mean, like obviously they're there to support the Zin guy, but then even like the crowd, say outside of that room, they like are like seem like they're just there to cause a ruckus, and like it's just a lot of that all mixed together, and you're just like, man, not even like a convention, like, because I go to a lot of Comic Cons, so maybe I'll preface it that way. When you go to a lot of Comic Cons, there's a lot of signs up like, hey, just because somebody's in a cosplay, that's not consent, and like,
Right.
you know, we're not going to have this kind of hateful language here, and all of that stuff. So that's kind of like when I was coming from that perspective of this Comic Con, and then when you see these people in Mothcon, I'm like, that's horrifying. Like to think like this injection of this like alpha male, the concept is in there on top of being trapped in the wheelchair, and it was just all of it. I was like, oh, that's just, oh, you know, like that is like pure horror in the realest sense of like.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and in some ways, I mean, you know, again, I've never really aspired to inject, you know, doctrinaire ideology into my books, but you know, the part of the book is about the inescapability of, for lack of a better word, patriarchy.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that you know, when you go into certain realms, that you know, it is a boys' club, and there is no escape, and there is no lock for the door. And
Oh God,
yeah,
sorry.
and
Just thinking that ending.
yeah, and so the idea that, you know, and the horror of that, and you know, when and so I felt the need to vocalize that, and using the convention setting. And I'm, you know, one of the things I found from interacting with the paranormal community in you know, just online, is, you know, like every community has its bad actors.
Yeah.
And so you have like these political controversies in like the paranormal community, like in the cryptid community, you have, you know, kind of like the people who are right winger, you know, Nazis, and then you have, yeah, and then you have like the people who are, you know, more progressive, or, you know, more, you know, not Nazis, you know, and so, you know, it's like, you really have this, you know, I think there was even like a kind of a scandal in one of the UFO groups, where there was like, you know, the guy in charge of the UFO group was, you know, also saying horrible racist things, and you know, it ended up being a scandal within like this, you know, nationally known UFO group. And so yeah, so you have these kind of dynamics everywhere. And also a convention in some place like West Virginia would be different than like a Comic-Con convention. I mean, that's the other thing is,
yeah,
you know, you do tend to see in the Bible Belt a slightly different convention experience, where it's not so much like, you know, like a national convention or something like that, but if you have like a regional or local convention, you have more of, you know, there's more of that element there, and so yeah, it's a thing, but it's unlikely to play out quite the way it did in the book.
Fair.
But you know, part of what I'm doing is kind of tragic satire, you know. So so there's, you know, satirical stuff. Some you know, I've recently begun thinking about my books as a slapstick tragedy, and the idea that as opposed to slapstick comedy, and so you have a certain exaggeration, a certain grotesque depiction of these phenomena.
Yeah. No, that makes that makes total sense. Oh, I love that description. That is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Honestly, all the scenes of the convention like had me cracking up as like it was like horrifying, but like really funny at the same time.
Mhm.
Like, what was it? The I forget the guy's name, but that big speaker, the main speaker.
Oh, Lyman Zinn?
Yeah, that was just like, I'm only wearing this face diaper because they're making me.
Again, but drawn from real life. I had a customer at my bookstore pretty much say that line.
I had a customer at my bookstore ask me why I'm still wearing a mask, and then he started coughing in my direction.
Oh, God, people.
Yeah, people are just awful, especially to people in retail. Like,
yes,
yeah, they see you as somehow less of a person, I think.
Yes,
I think it should be a requirement for everybody to work retail for 1 year, mandatory.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yes.
Totally.
Especially like we'll say Christmas season, then you'll get it all. And then you'll feel very different after you get out of that, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like what you captured, like, because I do a lot of like I don't talk politics too much or push my politics on people, but I'm pretty sure we all in this podcast have pretty similar views about things.
Mhm.
And I think the way you captured like these people in the book felt perfect to how
thank
like
you.
people can themselves online, even the ones I've seen in person. Like it just feels like you really captured that down really well, and it was both like funny, but also horrifying that these people exist.
And also kind of tragic. I mean, there's part of the book where I describe some of them, and oftentimes these are people who have never fallen in love. For example, these are people, or and I'm not saying I know all of them and that none of them have ever fallen in love, but I think when you're looking at like the incel community and that kind of thing, in particular, people. I mean, there's just like, there's. And especially when you look at some of the young people who were at the insurrection on January the 6th, I mean, they kind of look like either they were over medicated or not under medicated. They kind of look like, they never have really, had an opportunity to connect with people. So, and they are human beings. And, one hopes that, given enough maturity, they will see the error of their ways and improve their lives. But in the meantime, they're dangerous and worrisome and a threat. Yeah. So it's multifaceted. There's definitely a horrible person kind of there, and but at the same time, there's probably, definitely there's a human being and there's nuance to that. And, it doesn't let them off the hook, but it's interesting to look at the layers of what makes the QAnon shaman, do what the QAnon shaman does. And there's certainly a weirdness to it. I mean, especially when he got it in jail and he was like asking for organic food, and his mother was interviewed by the press saying that he must have organic food or else he's going to get sick, and, I guess, Hitler was a vegetarian. So maybe there's, I don't know, but there's, so much weirdness and yet so much danger too. And an alarming kind of danger. And I really have a fear that things are going to get worse before they get better. And I don't know how much worse they can get where, for our republic to sustain itself. I don't know. I mean, a constitutional republic is a fragile thing, as Ben Franklin told, the people when he left the Constitutional Convention, at least this is what the story says. leaving the Constitutional Convention, and someone says, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. We have to keep the republic, and if that means, fighting back against those who would subvert the will of the people. Fighting and having some courage in it, and doing things that are inconvenient. I'm not going to toot my own horn, but in 2020, I got political, and I participated in some phone banks and that kind of thing to keep the orange monster, or rather to kick the orange monster out. That's the kind of thing that, I'm not using that as a self-righteousness card or anything like that. There are times when you have to do this kind of thing to, it's like, you don't want it to be the kind of thing like in that poem. I want to say is it Tennyson? I think the poem where there's that line that the best lack all conviction and the worst are filled with passionate intensity. I think it's that poem, "The Second Coming," and the one about what great beast comes to Bethlehem to be born or something. We don't want to get into that kind of situation. So I hate to say, be like on a soapbox and say, get involved, kids, but I think we are at a point where we have to get involved, that we don't have the luxury of sitting on our hands and or the luxury of just kind of not voting. It's like, because one side's going to come out and vote, and they're going to vote for Trump, and if we have to counter it, and we have to be accurate in our depiction of things, and we have to, I think, be accurate about the danger that we face, because there are people who want to do away with the voting process. Basically, they want to, something that has served this nation with all its faults and with all its warts. We have gradually expanded voting rights, and that expansion needs to be preserved, and that expansion needs to count. And that means, we need to count every vote, and we need to honor the vote, and we need to not, dissolve the right to vote, which is basically what some people in this country want. They want the state legislators to handle it all. They want to upset the voting process, and they want a autocrat. And I don't want an autocrat, and I'll fight him.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, and like, I think you bring up like a good point in the book where she's watching the group, and the group, and the way you describe it, talking about the scary thing and everything that we were going here, is like the group because the group is standing and putting their hands up, and they're swaying, and they're doing all these things. And you mentioned like, well, they're doing it because there might be somebody in the back of the crowd that is going to see them and is going to want to be a part of this group. So they're going to get up and raise their hands. And then after this speech, they're going to go up and they're going to talk to Zinn, and they're going to listen to what he has to say. Then they're going to go buy his books, and then they're going to be basically indoctrinated into this group. And I think that I think exactly what you're saying is like, if we don't go vote, if we don't, work at like a polling station and do phone calls and all these things, the other side they're doing it this other way. They're flashing, and they're, like you said, they're being rude and all these things to get that groups that get these kind of unsure people's attention and be like, look, you can be part of our cool group and like, yeah, wear the buffalo hat and
Right.
and like and run through and smash because you're a little boy that didn't get to smash enough stuff when you were little. So let's do it now and just
Right.
listen to these people. And hey, you know, not thinking about the fact that, oh, you're buying their books and you're giving them money, and all this stuff in the end is just you're giving these people the money that they want, and they're, you know, they're using you to get this. And it's just like, yeah. So that little like passage, and I think it was like one of her little stories that she was kind of telling herself, but it's very accurate because it's like that's how it works. Is we've seen that where I can't remember who it was. There was like this whole article about this one woman that did show up at that in January 6th, where like you could see her progression on Facebook of being a very left-leaning person and be like all for stuff, but her slow change and buying into these things and listening to being part of the insurrection. And it's just because that's exactly what you captured here. Is like they want to be part of something and they're going to listen and they're going to do all these things. So it's
and I think there's also like some people I think were attracted to the melodrama of it. I mean, you know, some of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th probably thought that they were kind of in a Marvel movie or something, you know. You know, I mean, they didn't know that like there are like real people in the Capitol, you know. I mean, it's, you know, a little bit like the 9/11 terrorists. I mean, like when they drove their planes into the Pentagon, they didn't, you know, like I lived in the DC area, the greater DC area at the time. It's like you looked at the obituaries in the day afterwards, and it's like, you know, all these janitors who worked at the Pentagon, you know, and it's like, you know, these were the people who died, you know, and I'm sure there were some military people who died and everything, but it was like civilian employees who were just working there trying to like, you know, make a living with a steady government job. And that those are people who died. And it's like, you know, it goes back to like the idea that only a Sith thinks in absolutes, you know, and but you know, to kind of take another pop cultural reference, but I think people are wanting a life that's more exciting than what reality is, you know, and so as a result, they get hooked into this, and it's interesting after like, you know, I remember reading about QAnon and reading about you know, like after the election when, you know, there were all these like, you know, predictions of like, oh, but you know, Trump is going to come back in March, and that's because that's going to be the official re-inauguration day, and Biden is going to be put into prison, and then that didn't happen, and then gradually some people started to leave, but when they left, like apparently, according to this article I read a couple of years ago, you know, there were people posting on the QAnon boards of like, well, it's been fun, but you know, it's time to move on. It's like, it's been fun, you know. It's like what
people's lives.
But I think there was this sense of like, you know, almost like it was a live action role play for some of those people. You know, they were LARPing, and they were, you know, and that's where there's, you know, something isn't connecting with people. Like they want this kind of melodramatic experience, and they want a foe that they can you know, kind of blame for all their problems, I suppose. And then there's this entitlement, of course, and you know, this people who are terrified of demographic change, when demographic change is at the heart of who America is. I mean, you know, America at its best is has always welcomed, or maybe not always welcomed, but has, in theory, you know, tried to aspire to the ideals of the Statue of Liberty, and yet, you know, here we have very you know, nativism rearing its head again, and which it has periodically through our history, but in a much more, I think, assertive and nasty way than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. And that's kind of a frightening thing. I can remember when, even a president who I would have some issues with, like Ronald Reagan, would say things like, talk about the positives of immigration and talk about how people come from all over the world because they want to be a part of America. And we used to say that was a wonderful thing. And I think now more than ever, like my neighborhood in Southern Indiana is very diverse. And I'm grateful for that. I have neighbors who are African American. I have neighbors who are originally from the Middle East. I have neighbors who are rednecks, and we all live pretty peacefully together. I mean, it's really, I think my little street in Southern Indiana has a lot to teach people. I mean, we get along, and not only get along, but we enjoy each other's company. I have another neighbor who is, one of the parents is originally from Central America, and the other one is originally from the U.S. and they have their kids, and their kids play with the kids of the Middle Eastern family, and we all get along. And then I'm jogging through the neighborhood, and I say hi to them, and the kids give me a high five as I jog by, and and that's what this country can be, it's just disappointing that there are people who are afraid of that. They're afraid of those kids, and they're afraid of losing their privilege, I guess, is how some people would say it, or and that is abominable. I mean, that's I find that detestable. I don't know how I got on that rant, but I don't know what question I was answering.
Don't worry.
It's okay. It's okay. And also, this is a part of the book where, like, the politics of the now or the 2020 really come into effect, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of those politics today.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that, like, some people have issues with those who are different than them, but it's nice to see, like, I like to think most Americans are able to not fall into that trap and not fall into that mindset.
About 50% of them are having a hard time.
50% are definitely rearing their heads. But
in 2016 it was 50% plus one. So, but I think that there is, I don't know. I mean, I what makes me afraid is the stupidity of the average American voter. I mean, and I say this not from a sense of being up on high and kind of judging people without hearing them. I listened to a podcast of a focus group, and every week they have a different focus group, and these are the average American voter, and you hear the rationale for people voting the way they do. And for example, in 2016, it was, Trump's a businessman, and we need someone who runs the nation like a business. It's like, well, first of all, what does that even mean? We need someone who runs the nation like a business. I mean, for a profit, that's kind of like ambiguous. But also, Trump was never a good businessman. My God, he declared bankruptcy multiple times. He would have probably made more money if he just put the money his daddy gave him in a savings account. But there's, I think the big dividing line on Trump is, like, did you watch him in The Celebrity Apprentice or did you not?
Right.
And I did not. And there's people who watched him and thought that all of that was legitimate. And that they're the ones who apparently gave him a chance to be the president. Excuse me.
In retrospect, we can see it was a very bad call.
Yeah. It's kind of like, if you want to hire a taxi driver, it'd be good to have, the guy at least know how to drive. And, it's like Trump. I mean, think about it. Like, the average American, like, would you want him to be like the coach of your kid's little league team? No, you wouldn't.
No.
But I think people like him because he pisses off people who are liberal and progressive. And so, it's, the cruelty is the point for a lot of the people on, and because it's, a lot of the remarks are made on Twitter or whatever, there's a sense of unreality to it. There's a sense of it like being just, for shits and giggles. And, they see him as an entertainer, and they don't realize, and then before you know it, he's entertaining, and then before you know it, people are dying in Charlottesville, and people are dying at the Capitol. And, he's, has a plan to stay in office after he loses an election. Something I don't think we've ever seen in American politics.
No.
And, yeah. So, I mean, I think part of the problem is like, we have voter stupidity, and I don't know what you do about that. I mean, that's like a long-term project. How do you instill critical thinking in people and get people to think better? That's why, I have real fear for the country.
Yeah.
That's completely understandable.
Yeah. What a downer, huh?
Yeah. Just start off as a honestly though, I had a feeling this is going to go down that road, especially with the topics that are covered in Mothwoman.
Yeah. I mean, there is a bleakness out of it, but sometimes you need to fiddle even as Rome burns, because even in burning Rome, people need to hear fiddling.
Yeah.
And the thing is too is like, even though there is that serious aspect to like this book and this conversation, there's a big heart that like we as us in this podcast, you as the writer of this book, like we have a deep compassion for people and this country and people in this world, and seeing the meanness and the anger that came out of Donald Trump and QAnon and all that stuff, like really, like I can just speak for myself, like really affected me and my mental health in like a very negative way. Seeing people lash out and be mean like that, and like I never understood the just being mean to people always confused me. Like I mean, and I'm like, I'm just gonna fuck up somebody's day because I'm unhappy.
Right. I mean, and I have to say this after having, condemned 50% of the population for being stupid, so I have to own some of that, airing my own frustration in that way. But it's, there is something, I try never to be in my, there's kind of two me's. There's the me on the page, and there's me in day-to-day life. And in day-to-day life, I, really strive not to be cruel. Do I succeed all the time? I think mostly I succeed. Am I human, and do I sometimes, say and do stupid things? Yes, because I'm human. But never gratuitously cruel, and always I try to walk through life with the awareness that I am just, that I am not the star of the show, that life is an ensemble cast, and I need to be part of, just whatever I'm a part of, my workplace or whatever. I'm just one part of the whole. And so, and on the page, there's certainly lots of depictions of cruelty, but never, I think, for shits and giggles, and never really without some emotional realism tossed into it. And sometimes with a satirical lens, but the satire, of course, has a point. And so, it's very disheartening to see people act cruelly, and then, it's kind of like what's going on with, the governors in the southern states who were like, airlifting these people who were seeking asylum in the United States from repressive regimes. And, they basically flew them to Martha's Vineyard and just kind of dropped them off there. I mean, that's incredibly cruel.
Yeah.
And awful. And so, Yeah, I mean, I don't get that.
Yeah.
I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit, but
That's okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions about this, Matt?
No, I am good.
I do want to say, just for our audience, if they've stuck through to the spoilers and haven't ducked out because the political talk, we haven't talked about the last part of this book, and I just want to say that's going to be a surprise when you get there, because that was fucking wild.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, those last couple pages.
Yeah,
oh yeah, yeah.
It's worth getting through. Like it's worth getting to the end of this book, and I don't want to spoil this for our audience, because man, was that that was great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, and there's my character is the Mothwoman, and there's a family member of the Mothwoman who does appear, for those final scenes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. But where can our listeners get in touch with you, Nicole?
Well, they can use a Ouija board. No, I'm not dead. They can go to my parole officer. No, I'm not on parole. No, they can go. Probably the easiest place is Facebook, and just drop me a message if you want to. My website is NicoleCushing.com, and I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Nicole Cushing, where more or less every day now I've been posting my observations on things and talking about the book, talking about the, kind of an inside discussion of the promotional process of the book. You get to get updates about, kind of the writing process for the books. I give updates as I'm writing them, updates as, I'm sending them out to publishers and whatnot. So that's probably where I do the bulk of like my blogging now, is on Patreon. And yeah, or if you live in Southern Indiana, you can find me crossing the bridge twice a day and, going into Louisville. I don't know. You can find me at the Meijer every Friday at the local Meijer grocery store. And, you'll see me. I'm the one who's 6 feet tall and hasn't had her hair cut in about 2 months. And, yeah, and I'll be in the aisle with the Gatorade and giving a discerning eye at the roast beef. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Awesome.
I love it. Just as a side for listeners, the Patreon is great. I've been subscribed for a couple of years, I feel like, and it's a great insight. And I talked about a book that you had recommended because I picked it up. So like it's I think people should sign up for it. It's super cool.
Well, thank you.
No problem. And yeah, I guess to answer your question, Twitter at Brandenburg DM.
And you can follow me on Twitter at Rudy53088, and make sure to give Abyss a follow with @into staring. And just to make sure you get to Amazon, wordhorror.com, anywhere books are sold, and pick up a copy of Mothwoman, because it is fantastic. But this is Richard Gerlach saying, keep staring.